After Annie died, the town kept moving, as if it had made no room for grief at all. The bakery still opened before sunrise, the blacksmith still struck iron, and wagons still rolled through the same muddy ruts beneath my window. That was the first cruelty I noticed. The world had the nerve to go on. I could not pass the church without seeing Annie in the pew near the front, her hat pinned neat, Luke leaning into her side with his boots kicking the bench. I could not open the workshop door without smelling pine shavings, oil, and the faint smoke from the little stove I used in winter. Every board, every cup, every quiet corner of that house seemed to remember my wife and boy more faithfully than I could bear. People tried to be kind. They brought pies and preserves, folded their hands, lowered their voices, and said the same careful things men and women always say when death is standing in the room with them. They meant well, but each word made the walls feel smaller. By spring, I understood that if I stayed, I would slowly become a ghost in my own rooms. Some mornings I woke in my chair beside the cold stove, still dressed, with no memory of when the dark had turned into dawn. Once I stood in the rain outside the church so long that the pastor came out to ask if I meant to come in, and I turned away before he finished speaking. The truth was simple enough. I did not leave because I was brave. I left because I could not keep breathing there. I sold the house first to a young couple with clear eyes and a baby on the way, and I hated myself for noticing that their happiness fit inside my old walls without effort. I sold the workshop next, and that cut deeper than I expected. A man from the next county hauled away my benches, my chisels, my clamps, and the shaving horse I had built the year Luke was born. Each thing left in another man's wagon, and every wheel turn sounded to me like a door closing. When I was done, I kept only what I could carry or hitch behind me. Bedding, an axe, a rifle, a coffee pot, a sack of beans, Annie's Bible, and Luke's one-armed tin soldier. Folks asked where I meant to go, and I told them west, because west was less a place than the only answer I had left. In my mind, I had fixed on the Colorado mountains, not from romance, but because I had heard there were valleys high enough and lonely enough to strip a man down to his bare work. I told myself I was going there to begin again, but even then the thought felt thin in my chest, more like a last rough chance not to come apart. On the morning I left, the sky was low and colorless, and the river beyond town ran full with snowmelt that slapped against its banks like cold hands. I loaded the wagon before sunrise, leather creaking, harness rings clicking, my horse blowing steam into the dark while the livery boy watched and, out of kindness, kept his mouth shut. No crowd gathered to see me off. Maybe that was mercy. I climbed to the seat, gathered the reins, and looked once at the town where I had buried everything worth the name of home. I did not feel hope. I felt only the plain, hard knowledge that if I stayed another month, another week, maybe even another day, I would break in some ordinary way that no one could see until it was too late. So I flicked the reins, turned toward the river road, and left the town behind me before the sun had fully cleared the trees. The road followed the river north for a while, passing bare cottonwoods, old fence lines, and fields washed pale by winter. And I remember thinking that the whole country looked the way I felt, stripped down, exposed, waiting for weather. Near the edge of town, the road dipped beneath an old iron bridge where the water ran darker and faster between its stone banks, and I slowed the horse there without meaning to, as if some part of me was not ready to leave even though I had already chosen. Then I heard something under the bridge. So faint, I thought at first it was only the river working through the pilings below me in shadows. Under the bridge, the air turned colder, and the river sounded different, squeezed tight between stone and iron, as though the water itself were whispering under its breath. I pulled on the reins and listened, thinking at first I had imagined it, some trick of current and steel. But then I heard it again, a thin, broken sound that did not belong to the river. I climbed down from the wagon seat and stepped carefully along the bank, boots slipping in the wet clay, one hand on the bridge post while the horse behind me tossed his head and stamped. There, tucked against the lower stones in a nest of rags gone dark with damp, was a puppy no bigger than my two hands together, shaking so hard I thought the cold might break him apart. He could not have been there long, but he was already half gone, eyes sealed with grime, belly hollow, ribs moving fast beneath skin so thin it seemed made for some gentler world than this one. He let out another whimper when I bent near, and that sound went straight through me, because it was the sound of something small, trying with all it had to stay in the world. I stood there longer than I should have, staring down at him and feeling, for the first time since I had buried Annie and Luke, something sharper than grief move in my chest. Not mercy exactly, though there was some of that in it, nor hope, because I did not trust hope anymore, but a plain refusal to walk away from a living thing left helpless in the cold. I took off my scarf, lifted him as gently as I knew how, and wrapped him inside the wool until only his nose showed, cold and black and wet against my wrist. He weighed almost nothing, yet the heat leaving him was so desperate and slight that I tucked him inside my coat at once, between my shirt and vest, and buttoned both closed. The pup made one weak sound and then burrowed closer, and when I felt that small, seeking movement against my chest, I had to grip the bridge rail until the shaking passed. I told myself it was the cold on my hands and the wind off the river, but I knew better. I had left town with nothing in me but emptiness and stubborn motion, and now this half-dead scrap of fur was asking something of me before the mountains had even begun. When I climbed back to the wagon seat, I held one hand inside my coat the whole while, feeling for the faint rise and fall of him, as though my own breath depended on his. I nearly turned back right then, not because I doubted the road ahead, but because I knew what a burden such a creature would be on a journey I already had no right to call easy. Then he stirred once beneath the scarf and pressed his nose against my skin, and I understood that turning back was no longer about me alone. A man may fail himself and keep moving. It is harder to fail a thing that has chosen you without knowing why. So I settled him deeper inside my coat, tucked the scarf around him again, and spoke aloud for the first time that day. "Easy now," I said. "Easy, little fellow. You and me will see what this road makes." He needed a name before the day was out. I do not know why that seemed important, only that nameless things feel closer to the grave. The river road climbed away from town, and the horse found his pace while I listened for the small sounds under my coat, each one a proof that the world had not finished taking yet. By noon the clouds had thinned, but the wind stayed raw, and when I stopped to water the horse and warm a little milk over a twig fire, I fed the pup a few drops from a bottle. Most of it dribbled down his chin and onto my thumb, yet he fought for those few drops with a stubbornness so fierce and foolish that I laughed before I knew I still could. "Joey," I said then, though I could not have told you where the name came from. It fit him at once, small and bright and stubborn enough to argue with death. He slept after that, hidden against me, while the town shrank behind the bends of the river, and the first shadows of the mountains gathered far ahead. By the second day, the river road had thinned into wagon track, and then into little more than two pale lines through wet spring ground. Town sounds were gone. No hammer on iron, no doors closing, no church bell. Only wind in the cottonwoods, crows in the fields, and Joey's small breath against my chest when I tucked my hand inside my coat to make sure he was still there. That first night away from town, rain came in a cold mist that soaked the blanket roll and turned the firewood stubborn. I crouched over the flames with my hat brim dripping, shielding the sparks with both hands while Joey slept inside my shirt. When the fire finally caught, I warmed milk in a tin cup, dipped my finger in it to test the heat, and fed him a few drops at a time from the bottle until his little body stopped trembling. By morning, the road had become a trail climbing into broken country, where stone showed through the mud and snow still held in the shade of the pines. I walked more than I rode, saving the horse on the steeper grades and keeping Joey tucked inside my coat whenever the wind sharpened. The higher we went, the quieter the world became, until even my own thoughts sounded too loud among the trees. I had imagined the mountains as clean and empty, a place where pain might thin out in the cold air. But that was the sort of lie a tired man tells himself when he has nowhere else to go. The truth was plainer. Everything had to be earned: fire, water, shelter. Even the strength to rise stiff and hungry and do again what the day before had already wrung out of me. More than once I woke in the dark with my hand on Joey, certain the stillness under my coat meant he had slipped away while I slept. Each time he answered with a weak squirm or a tiny sound, and I would lie there staring into the black, listening to the damp hiss of the dying fire, and feeling ashamed of how much that little answer mattered to me. I had not meant to care so quickly. I simply did. On the fourth day, we crossed a creek that had spilled out of its banks and spread over the trail in a sheet of brown, numbing water. I carried Joey high inside my coat, then led the horse through by hand, feeling the current shove against my knees and the stones roll under my boots. When we reached the far side, I sat in the wet grass, shaking with cold, while Joey rooted blindly for the bottle and the horse steamed in the wind. Sometimes the hardest hour came just before dawn, when the fire had burned low. The sky was still black, and the whole wilderness seemed to be holding its breath around me. In that hour, Annie returned most clearly, not as she had looked at the end, but as she was in summer, standing at our doorway with flour on her hands and Luke laughing somewhere behind her. I would shut my eyes and see them so plainly that opening them again felt like losing them twice. By then, I understood how foolish my leaving had been, if I had expected the mountains to heal me by mere distance. A different horizon does not lighten a grief. It only gives a man new ground on which to carry it. What the road offered was not peace, but labor. If I wanted to keep myself and Joey alive, I had to watch the weather, husband the food, dry my socks by the fire, mend harness before it failed, and rise each morning whether my heart felt equal to the day or not. By the time the first true peaks rose blue and sharp ahead of me, I knew I had not come west to find some beautiful new life waiting with open hands. I had come into a harder country, where cold, hunger, and loneliness kept strict account, and where memory walked beside me as faithfully as any dog ever could. Yet each evening I made the fire, warmed the bottle, checked Joey's breathing, and laid out one more day's worth of beans or flour for the morning. Small work, necessary work, the sort that gives grief less room to speak. I slept badly, woke often, and kept climbing, because the trail ahead was cruel, but it was still ahead. Each mile up stripped me down to what still stood.